Welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome councillors and staff and declare this meeting open at 2:01 p.m. Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continued connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Do we have all councillors are present at the moment? Yes, no apologies. So in attendance we have Mrs Marissa Walters, Council's Acting General Manager, Miss Josie Higgins, Council's Executive Officer, Miss Bevilacqua, Council's Planning, and Mr Lee Whiten, Council's Contract Development Engineer, and Mr Dion Bellingham, Council's Executive Manager of Development. And I think that's it at this stage. I think Mr Purvis will be joining us later, will he? Or I'm not sure.
And Rob Brunning will join us later.
And Mr Rob Brunning, Council's Works Manager, he'll be joining us later as well. So we have councillors. You would have got and received this morning the 2 minutes of the special meeting of Council 24th of July 2020, an open session, and this will become 2.3 within the agenda. Can I have a mover for that, please? 2.4. Sorry, 2.3. Can I please have a mover for the motion? Councillor Browning. You're on mute. She's frozen. So Cheryl, Councillor.
I move that the late report item capital works budget allocation be added as 2.3 to the agenda.
Just one moment, Councillor Browning, because we've had a few frozen there for a minute.
This one is the 2.3.
2.3, yes.
And that one
7 points.
The
motion that the motion I'm seeking is for 2.3, which is the minutes of the special meeting of council.
Oh, okay. 2.3. Okay. So I move that the late item report, the minutes of the special meeting of council held on the 24th of July 2020, be added to the agenda for the 25th of August 2020 as item 2.3.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Arnold? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So that goes in at 2.3. And the other late agenda item that we have is the capital works budget allocation. Can I have a mover for that motion, please, for it to be included in this agenda? Councillor Browning?
I move that the late report item capital works budget allocation be added as item 2.7.5 to the agenda for the 25th of August 2020.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Robinson. Can I have all those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Ms Higgins, could you note that Mr Brunning has entered the room, please? Thank you. I asked the elected members to indicate whether they have any interest personally or by close associate as defined in Section 49 of the Local Government Act 1993, or any conflict as described in Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors in any item included on the agenda. So Councillor Brenny? You're on mute. Yep, that's it.
Thank you, Mayor. I am declaring an interest in item 7.4.
Thank you.
Swansea Court Out Management Committee. I'll be forwarding my reasons to the General Manager via email because of an association with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a conflict? Councillor Browning?
I'm declaring interest in 4.1 and I'll send something to the Acting General Manager about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Churchill?
Yes, I want to declare an interest in 4.1 also, and I'll forward my reasons to the General Manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors with any other conflict or perceived conflict? All good? Thank you. So, councillors, when Councillor Browning, Councillor Churchill and Councillor Brenny, I'm sure you're all aware, with the Zoom, you'll be popped into a waiting room in that time and then brought back in once the decision is made. Thank you. So we move on to item 2, confirmation of the minutes. 2.1, ordinary meeting of council. There's a recommendation there. Please may I have a mover? Councillor Brenny.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. I move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held Tuesday, 28th of July 2020 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Simons. Does a mover wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mayor.
The seconder wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? No, thank you very much. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we have item 2.2, special meeting of council held on the 14th of August 2020. Can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? Councillor Robinson.
That the minutes of the special meeting of council held Friday, 14th of August 2020 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
And can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Browning. Does a mover wish to speak to the motion?
No.
Seconder wish to speak to the motion? Any discussion on those minutes? Then I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. So now we're up to late. Oh, what the item 2.3. Can I have a mover for a motion, please? Councillor Browning. Off mute, please, Councillor Browning. Sorry.
Sorry. Start again. I move that the minutes of the special meeting of council held Friday, the 24th of July, 2020, open session at 1 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Arnold. Does the mover wish to speak to the motion? Does the seconder wish to speak to the motion? Any debate on the motion? On the minutes? No. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Let's start with the minutes. We now move on to item 2.4, the date and purpose of workshops held. There was a workshop on the 11th of August 2020, which was a Tuesday. Everyone is there. And the agenda. And that was it. Can I have a mover for a motion, please? Councillor Breeney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that council notes the information.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Robinson. Mover wish to speak? No. And the seconder wish to speak? No. That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. We're moving on now to item 3, public question time. We do have a question without notice, and I will read it to you, councillors. It's from Miss Jen Hackett, and it reads, I'm trying to gain a deeper understanding of the VIC finances and the financial reasons for the closure decision. Since so little detailed information has been released to date by council. Following the financial information provided to Mr. Yong Kickett's question on notice, I thought these questions might help further the community's understanding of the financial information provided, and mine as a very basic P&L such as presented gives little depth of understanding to the community of what the actual costs involved are and how they arise. I also cannot see where $360,000 has come from, the figure quoted by council as an overall cost saving by closing the VICs. I am very confused now, as I imagine many others are too. I would expect the information I request should be easily attainable, given the analysis of that analysis that council would have performed on the VIC finances for the decision to close the VICs. Question 1. What portion of the wages stated as VICs wages are overhead wages for non-operational staff working out of council cost centres? Please indicate the cost centres that these costs are attributed from in your answer individually, i.e. what proportion comes from finance wages, payroll department, general manager's wage, general administration wages, etc. Stated in either percentage or dollar value is fine. Mrs. Walters, Acting General Manager, has a response.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me. Pop over this side. So no proportion of the wages stated as VIC wages are overhead wages from non-operating staff working out of other council cost centres. So it only includes direct costs from Visitor Information Centre staff. Thank you.
Okay. So we also have question 3.2, questions on notice from Mr. Yong Kickett.
Question 2.
Sorry. Oh, beg your pardon, there's question 2 from, my apologies to Ms. Hackett and to you councillors. On the back of this, I had another question. So there's, what proportion of materials and services is overhead cost charged from other council costs centres? Please indicate the council's cost centres that these costs are attributed from in your answer individually stated in either percentage or dollar value is fine.
So no proportion of the materials and services are overhead costs charged from other council cost centres, only direct costs.
Once again, my apologies for that oversight, councillors. So we now go on to 3.2, questions on notice from Mr. Yong Kickett. The question is there, and Mrs. Walters has answered that question. So we now move on to Planning Authority section number 4. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold.
I'll move that council now acts as a planning authority at 2:15 p.m.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Breening. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. We move on to 4.1, report on representations to the draft Glamorgan Spring Bay Council local provision schedule. No, right. Okay, so the report is there and there is a recommendation on page 26. Can I please have a motion? Oh, time, sorry.
This is 4.1 we're on, right?
Yes, that's correct.
need to be locked away in the waiting room.
And, Annie as well.
Yes, that's correct. Oh, I've got the other one. My apologies, councillors. So the recommendation is on page 12 there. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Breeny.
Madam Acting Mayor, prior to making moving the recommendation, could I draw your attention to the report on page 12, second paragraph? States the TPC will then seek the agreement of the Minister for Planning for the final form of the Meander Valley LPS before it is approved. I presume that's a typographical error. And in the final paragraph, the last partial sentence needs to be deleted where it states delegation also is required too.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Breeny.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. And I'd like to move that with those amendments, that the Planning Authority endorse 1.0 Planning Authority report under section 35F of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, consideration of representations to the draft Glamorgan Spring Bay Local Provision Schedule of Attachment 1 as its report pursuant to section 35F of the Act and forward to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. That was under the numeral 1. 2, that the Planning Authority endorse 2.0 Planning Authority notice under section 35G of Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, if those words could be included, recommended amendments to the state planning provision of attachment 1 as its notice pursuant to section 35G of the Act and forward to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. 3, that the Planning Authority, pursuant to section 6 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, delegate to the General Manager and Executive Manager Development or persons acting in those positions its powers and functions to A, modify the report submitted under sections 35F and 35G if a request is received from the Tasmanian Planning Commission for further information, and B, represent the Planning Authority or appoint a representative for the Planning Authority at hearings pursuant to section 35H.
Thank you, Councillor Breeny. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you. Madam Acting Mayor, could I just speak before the mover? I believe we need to include in number 1, after the attachment 1, including the addendum provided in relation to representation 23.
Did you get that, Ms. Higgins?
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Breeny, is that okay with you to be accepted?
Yes, I was wondering how that was going to be included. I understand there was a late representation.
Yes.
I'm very pleased. Thank you very much, Councillor Arnold.
So that being said, Councillor Breeny, being the mover, would you like to speak to the motion?
I don't think it's about, well, I'd like to say that this is a major presentation that we're putting through to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, and I hope that it's given a good hearing. And also it's reassuring that this is not the last and end word. We're going to be in a position where we're going to be able to, in the future, like all planning scheme situations, ask for amendments and changes and alterations in line with the Act and in line with the thing. So I'm quite happy that this is actually getting done. It's about time. It's been years in the making. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold, being the seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I'd just like to concur with Councillor Breeny's comments, but also I'd like to acknowledge the work that was done on the by the planner in relation to this report, because as Councillor Breeny identified, it has been a very big job to get to this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? For the motion? Any discussion with regards to the motion? No. That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's myself, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Simons, Councillor Breeny, Councillor Arnold. The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Would you let the other two? So Councillor Browning and Councillor Churchill, just to let you know that the motion was carried unanimously. We're moving now on to 4.2, subdivision application 2020-7, 52 Charles Street, Orford. The recommendation for this one is actually on page 26. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Browning.
I move that pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, subdivision application 2020-7 to subdivide an existing lot into 8 residential allotments at 52 Charles Street, Orford, CT 135657-2, with stormwater drainage across 46 Charles Street, CT 252719/5, and 5 Prosser Street, CT 8012/4, be approved with the following conditions, 1 through to 40, and advice A to W.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Churchill? Would the mover like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'd just like to say that I'll be voting for this. I just have a question to Robin. Oh, sorry, Ms. Bevilacqua, in regards to the section about TAS water, which is on page 24, which says that there's been a revised layout which hasn't been received. That'll be added to the conditions once it's received. Is that correct, Ms. Bevilacqua?
Sorry, I think we're on now.
Yes.
That revised plan has been received and it will be attached.
Thank you.
So would the seconder like to speak to the motion? That was Councillor Churchill, yeah.
No, I'm fine, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is anyone speaking against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Robinson?
I'll be voting for the motion, but I've just got a couple of questions for Ms. Bevilacqua. Stormwater's been clearly a big issue in Orford in recent times, and it's pleasing to see that there are some amendments there and requirements to address stormwater with this development. In representation 1 on page 25, point 2 there talks about runoff, and I can attest to the fact that last time we had that major event in April, Prosser Street and Charles Street became rivers, and there was a lot of debris down on the road, and council staff did a fantastic job cleaning it all up. But I'm just wondering, with that point 2 of representation 1 there, it says a piped stormwater system serving the new lots connected to the public stormwater system will be provided as part of the subdivision. And I'm just wondering whether that pipe diameter is going to be enough to cope with an inundation such as what we had in April.
Yep, Councillor Robinson, I'm going to refer you across to Lee Whiten, our engineering consultant.
Thank you.
In response to the representation regarding runoff to Charles Street, the majority of the subdivision will be collected by a pipe system which will be directed across to Prosser Street. A portion of the driveway, which is existing and will need to be reconstructed as part of the subdivision, will have to go to Charles Street itself, but it should result in a net decrease in the amount of stormwater which currently discharges to the curb and channel in Charles Street. The remainder of the subdivision is likely to have to provide on-site stormwater detention to reduce flows from the subdivision to pre-existing runoff, so that there is no net increase in runoff from the subdivision into the pipe system in Prosser Street.
Thanks, Mr. Whiten. Yeah, I noted the detention pond, and I was just interested in the stormwater piping, and you've certainly addressed that. And I imagine it's been engineered to accommodate the water and lessen the flow in Charles Street. Thank you.
So is there anyone else to speak for or against? Councillor Arnold.
I'm not actually speaking for or against, Madam Acting Mayor. I just want to, first of all, thank Councillor Robinson for his question, because that and the response from Mr. Whiten has certainly answered my concerns in relation to the stormwater. Could I just note that in the advice section, advice U and V is to be deleted. They don't apply. Oh, well, particularly U. I'm not sure about V, whether that's going to be deleted, but U does not apply to this particular matter, so it needs to be removed.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. So is there anyone else to speak for the motion? Against the motion? That being said, I'll put the motion, though, all those in favour? Oh, sorry, that is myself, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Arnold, Councillor Breeny, Councillor Simons, Councillor Churchill, Councillor Browning. The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. So now we go on to 4.3, Subdivision Application 2020-9, 66 Alma Road, Orford, CT 35054/1. There is a recommendation on page 60. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Breeny.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Acting Mayor. I move that A, pursuant to Section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, the subdivision application 2020/9 to subdivide an existing lot into 11 residential allotments plus balance lot at 66 Alma Street, Orford, in brackets CT 35054/1, be approved with conditions 1 to 62, including the following sentence: prior to placing the subdivision onto the maintenance and effects liability period, the supervising engineer must provide certification that the works comply with council standard drawings, specifications, and the approved plans.
Thank you. Can I have a second to that motion, please? Beg your pardon. Just before we go any further with that, did Councillor Breeny, you want that part of the motion? The last
sentence. That last sentence is part of the motion, I believe. It's part of conditions.
Is it under A or is it?
And prior to my proceeding, or maybe proceeding for a seconder, I'd like a point clarified that I've asked for. In the past item 4.2, there was a series of advice provided A to W, which seemed to relate to subdivision works in general. And I'm wondering why that advice has not been included with this subdivision. I'd like to find from, through you, Mayor, if the Acting General Manager can reply to that.
Sorry, Councillor Brenning, we need a seconder for the motion for this to be able to, for this to happen. So I need a, but we also need to clarify too, Councillor Brenning, the wording. Now that last sentence, it was after the conditions 1 through to 62. Do you, that is your intention to have that as part of the motion?
I have to say, Madam Acting Mayor, that it seems to me that that should have been 63, but it doesn't have a number, and it is, in my opinion, an important part of the conditions.
So we'll put that.
So I would assume that it makes up part of the motion, as all of the conditions.
Is that, I think Councillor Brenny, is he referring to prior to placing the subdivision?
That's correct.
So that should be 0.63.
Do you want, it should be 0.63, you're saying, or it should be part of the motion?
Yeah, there's this last sentence which says prior to placing the subdivision, that should become 0.63. Is that what Councillor Breen is requesting?
It's either a, as the way I understand it, Councillor Breen, is that it's either a condition of the conditions, or it's part of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to amend my motion to read, when I can find it,
60.
to read conditions 1 to 63 and have the last sentence numbered 63. Thank you. But
thank you, Councillor Breen, that is done. Now, with that being said, is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Churchill? So would the mover like to speak to the motion?
thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. As I was stating before, there's a couple of issues that I'd like to make a comment on and ask for information on. Can I be reassured that the reason that we haven't deferred this until such time as Council has a stormwater management plan, possibly the most important issue in relation to this subdivision, the reason why it hasn't been deferred or held until we do have an in place and approved stormwater management plan is that there is a statutory requirement as far as this subdivision goes. That's the first question I have through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to our planner.
Councillor Briony, I don't think we can hold up the development application until we have a plan. What has been able to be done was that our works manager and our engineering consultant have put in conditions that basically mean that either the stormwater plan has to be done and implemented, either by council or by the proponents. I'll just double check that with Lee Whiten and Rob Brunning.
So yes, my understanding is that council were required to respond in the statutory timeframes and make a decision. As such, the recommended conditions are intended to provide some security that the the works required to mitigate any risk from flooding are undertaken prior to the sealing of the final plan of survey before that is done by council before any stage. Yes.
Okay, thank you. The second point in, sorry.
Could I just add a little bit of general background to that as well on the general risks to council? It is there in the engineering report on page 5, but I do want to try and explain it to the council, if that's okay.
Yes.
So we are in the process of developing the stormwater management plan, as you talked about, and it will talk about the requirements in the Brighton report to improve the management of the land downstream. And this will be all under the Urban Drainage Act. And as that name to the Act implies, it's for stormwater drainage in urban areas. The increasing intensification of development in this catchment does increase council's responsibility and risk. And so to better manage the stormwater in the area, council will need to enter at least 4 private properties to carry out the works. We haven't designed those works in those private properties. We haven't started negotiations with any of those landowners. But to properly manage the stormwater in the area, we'll need to go through that process, and it may require some land acquisition, but it's really it's down the track. You know, we're developing the designs, but we don't know the full implications of this works.
Thank you, Mr. Browning. My second point was in relation to the substantial 500-page attachments that we have. I don't know whether councillors or whoever have access to them at the moment, but on page 168, as part of the Tas Flora, I think it was called the Flora assessment, I'm not sure, natural values assessment, whatever. On page 168, there is a tree retention plan. For those of you who see it, there's it was quite simple and quite straightforward. The plan of the subdivision showed a series of trees in the area of public open space adjacent to the channel, the proposed channel, and it showed that there are 6 trees supposedly to be removed, and a total, I think, of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trees that are supposed to be retained. I visited the site, and already we're down to about 4 trees. The trees that are abutting the rear boundary of proposed lot 4 seem to be all removed already. The only comment I can make here is that without actually going out with a surveyor and marking, as Mr. Griggs or Nick Griggs and company have done on this plan, it's their plan, without actually going out there and marking which trees are which, I'm of the opinion that the vegetation has been disturbed contrary to the Tas Flora management plan. And I also make the comment that in the conditions, starting at condition 12, the Part 5 agreement on page 61 of the agenda, through to condition 26 on page 62, it outlines the environmental management of the site, which includes undertaking recommendations of the Tas Flora Management Plan, the revegetation plan, etc., etc. I would like to find out how council manages to ensure that the conditions that are here are going to be implemented, given that there is a 2-year requirement for vegetation management to be undertaken, including making sure that trees survive or planting survives, etc. Could I just find out how that's being managed by council? And my last point, I'd like to have that question clarified first before my last point. Thank you.
Would Ms. Bevilacqua like to answer that question, please?
Yes, Councillor Greeny, it's a real point that you make there, in that we don't really have ways of ensuring that these conditions are adhered to, other than reports that come in from the public. And it often is the case, I think, that things are removed without a planning permit or in advance of, not in line with conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Bevilacqua. My final point, I understand that, and I went and visited the site on the weekend, and I was quite surprised that the Tas Flora Management Plan seemed to be compromised by the fact that more trees had been cut down than they said were supposed to be. I quite understand council's situation in this matter. If we had plenty of money and plenty of additional staff, we'd be able to do these things. My last point is in relation to the representations, and I'd like to just make a comment for the sake of making it. One of the representations in a final paragraph says the following: it is recommended that councillors come to the area, view the problems for themselves, and discuss the issues with affected ratepayers, in brackets voters, rather than make cursory desktop decisions purely based on the biased information provided by the developer. Reassure the community and the planning authority members here that I never make a cursory biased desktop decision based on based on developers' information. I rely entirely on the professional information that we're provided at council, and thankfully it's up to the standard, which makes that job relatively easy for me. However, I'd just like to reassure that representative that I don't take very much notice of developers when I have contrary information from our planning staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Breeny. Just a second. Did you want to make?
I just need to clarify, because Dan's told us that this one needs to be not included.
Okay, so Mrs. Walters has a question for Mr. Bellingham.
Yes, so just clarify under the Part 5 agreement, condition 12 in page 61, 12D. Can we just get confirmation from the planning development team as to whether the stormwater tanks are required or not required? I believe there was an amendment to this condition.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll pass it on to Lee, Mr. Whiteley, if you can respond. For an amendment to that condition, and that's been sent through earlier.
I'm not sure that's been circulated to councillors.
So, if I may, the condition in the permit states that rainwater tanks are required. The report prepared by the applicant, their latest report did not include rainwater tanks. They are, however, required to submit an amended stormwater management report so that we're satisfied that the methodology they're proposing does work, which may mean that tanks may be required, but at this stage they aren't required. So it's proposed to amend 12D to the following. That 12D read as follows: where on-site detention is provided or required on individual lots. Point 1, the owners of lots 1 through 11 arising from the subdivision permit, excluding lot 100, must install and maintain rainwater detention tanks with diversion devices to collect all stormwater runoff from roofed areas of a size and type to be determined and shown in the engineering design drawings. Point 2, the design details for point 1 above are included in the agreement in a clear, readily understandable manner. The wording is such that it allows some flexibility that if the amended stormwater report comes back detailing that additional detention is required, that can be done through the means of rainwater tanks if necessary. And the wording is consistent with the requirements on the previously approved subdivision at 52 Charles Street.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Councillor Robinson, I'm going to ask the seconder, which was Councillor Churchill, if he'd like to speak to the motion.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mayor. There appears from the history of this development to have been quite a long gestation period. It appears that there's been compromises made to a large degree on this development since it was first proposed in 2008, where I believe the original number was 16, and then later on in 2019 I believe it came down to 14 lots, and now it's down to 11 lots. So it implies to me that there are serious issues involved in the density of this development, which is probably becoming more realistic as it progresses. But I have a question to, I guess, our engineers and or planner in regards to the stormwater tanks. I always get a bit confused about how these things actually work, because stormwater tanks aren't always empty when the storm starts. And what I can never really get is how, you know, a 10,000 litre stormwater tank, for example, with a roof area of around 200 square metres, which is not a big house these days, it's going to be full anyway with the first 50 mils of water. Now, you can assume whatever depth of water is already in it. I just don't quite get how this is adequate or really does anything to contribute to the overall event of an individual storm. Could I have some advice on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. Ms Bevilacqua?
I'm going to refer that to our engineering guys.
Yes, if I may. The wording of the proposed condition for the Part 5 agreement requires a design for those rainwater tanks. In order for the tanks to provide detention, they require a low flow outlet. So the revised condition doesn't specify a tank size, and the tank size would need to be determined by a calculation in determining a peak rainfall event and sizing the tank accordingly. The tank would also need to have a low flow outlet so that the tank could never be full. So a portion of the tank may be used for reuse. So you might have the bottom half of the tank used to store water. The top half of the tank, you may have a low flow outlet midway up the tank so that it will never hold water that the flow coming out of that tank and that low flow will be greatly reduced as compared to the normal runoff off the roof. So the tank will operate in reducing the peak flow. It doesn't change the volume of water that will come off, but it reduces the peak flow coming from the tank down to a point that would emulate pre-development.
No, thanks for that. That's the first time I've ever had that really explained to me. I guess then it depends on its efficiency, then depends on how big the tank is, I guess. That would be my simple way of thinking through that. I also noted back when Councillor Breeny referred back to the previous development, under the conditions on that development, which was 4.2, was it? There was an interesting one of the, well, it wasn't in the conditions, it was in the advice that I found rather interesting, and I wonder why such advice isn't given to all such developments, which was, it was advice number R in that list, which basically is saying that people who live on or by this land are basically responsible for whatever climate change does to that to these these blocks of land in the future. And I was just thinking that this sort of advice should be given to all subdivisions in relatively flood-prone areas. And I was wondering why such advice wasn't attached to this development.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. Ms Bevilacqua.
Through the Mayor, Councillor Churchill, we do have a range of set standard conditions that go onto all subdivisions and development applications. This time around, 2 different planning consultants did each of these reports, and simply one of them put the conditions in and the advice in, and one of them didn't. This one about climate change isn't one of our standard conditions, but I agree it would be a good idea to have it in there as one of our standard conditions.
Thanks, Ms Bevilacqua. Thank you for the explanation. That's all of my issues, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Yeah, I've got a few questions and a few things I'd like clarified. I thought it was good to see that the planning group and the engineers put conditions on this application that really attempt to address the stormwater issue, which has obviously been a huge issue for the residents in that area. As one of the representatives stated, it's now becoming a 1 in 4 year event where properties are being inundated with water. So I think that needs to be taken into account, obviously, in that particular area and other areas that are subject to inundation. I was sort of pleased to see that we were going to have stormwater tanks installed, because I know with more hard surfaces and more roof area, there's going to be greater runoff. And in line with what Councillor Churchill was saying about flood-prone areas, Council still obviously has a responsibility to make sure that we have adequate stormwater provision, and the stormwater tanks, I think, on the surface would be a good thing, notwithstanding what Lee's saying there, that they may come up with a different stormwater plan that may affect the size and need for those. So my point there is a bit like what Councillor Breeny was saying, like the 63 conditions here. And to give an example of the previous subdivision adjacent to the golf course there, one of their conditions was to put a detention pond in on the southern end of that subdivision. Now, they've made a start on that. I went round today and had another look at the whole area. But what makes it incumbent on that developer and this developer for the 66 Alma Road to actually complete those recommendations and conditions? So the question there is, a bit like Councillor Breeny saying, we can have all these conditions, But what are the penalties for non-compliance, and who makes sure they do comply?
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Ms. Bevilacqua?
Yes, through the Mayor, conditions like those, putting in detention ponds and such, are picked up at the engineering, design and engineering check-off stage. So there's no way anything like that would be able to go through without it being completed before the final plan can go off to be sealed. I'll just refer again to Lee just to double check that.
Yeah. By the point regarding the infiltration basin referred to adjacent the golf club, that is currently under construction and forms part of stage 2 of that particular subdivision. So it is not required as part of the stage of the subdivision which has currently been completed. It is under construction as part of stage 2. The security for council is that the titles won't be released by council for stage 2 until the works are completed, or that council has a bond in excess of the value of outstanding works prior to releasing titles for that stage of the subdivision. So in essence, the security for council is that we won't release the final plan of survey for any relevant stages of the subdivision until all works are completed, or we have a monetary bond to cover the cost of outstanding works.
Thank you. Councillor, I'll come.
Just one more point I had a couple of points.
My apologies.
So, sorry, Acting Mayor. Yeah, the other point to do with the stormwater tanks, I guess I'd just like to know what the likelihood of those being installed would be. Will it be dependent, as you're suggesting, on the amended stormwater plan, and will that come back to council, to Ms. Bevilacqua to make a decision on, or a recommendation?
Yes, so I believe the recommended condition says to the approval of the General Manager. So that would be delegated, I assume, to either to Rob Brunning as the Works Manager, or potentially to Dion as the Development Services Manager for the final sign-off. And that would then obviously be checked by appropriate people at council, potentially myself, and also council's consultant stormwater engineer as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I've basically really only got some comments around this, not necessarily speaking for or against, so if that's acceptable to you. As council's aware, I've had significant concerns around stormwater, particularly in that area with a couple of other subdivisions that's happened. And I'm comforted by the conditions that have been placed on this one. And there's a large number of conditions around dealing with the stormwater. And I'm very pleased to have heard how that is, if you like, going to be policed, because I've always had concerns. We put all these conditions on any manner of development application, but I always have this little niggling doubt about how they're actually policed. And so if I'm again taking comfort from the comments that have been made by our specialist staff. Could I just note that the description of the property is 66 Alma Street. I believe it's actually Alma Road rather than street. And Councillor Breeny did allude to the fact of the advice schedule that was in the previous matter that we dealt with. Will a similar advice schedule be included with this application, with this development? And I'm taking from Ms. Walters is nodding of her head that the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
other comment I have is in relation to the trees. I believe there were some trees, I don't know what number, but some trees were actually removed last year when this development application came to us then. So that's just in relation to Councillor Breeny's comment. And also, again, in relation to what Councillor Breeny commented, I'd like to thank Councillor Breeny for his comments regarding and support him in relation to the comment by the representative in relation to a desktop assessment, because like Councillor Breeny, I would like to assure any representative that I take the specialist advice, our specialist advice, and look and assess applications with the greatest degree of time. I can tell you, spend a fair bit of time on a lot of matters. So I thank Councillor Breeny for raising that in this particular forum. So beyond that, thank you, Mayor. I have no other further comment.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment to Councillor Simons?
Thanks, Acting Mayor, and this is probably directed towards the engineer, I think. Once the plans are sealed and handed over to Council, we talk about, on page 58, there's a note in a planner's response to the representatives. It talks about if there's an intolerable risk of flooding to the subdivision, and any increase in risk from flood from adjacent land will be identified and mitigated prior to council sealing the plan of survey for any stage of the subdivision, which I know we just covered, but where does it leave us when it is sealed and taken over by council? For example, we may not have a big flood event for 5 or 6 years. How do we mitigate that risk? How do we know it's going to work? How do we know the tanks are going to work? How confident can we be in the modelling that we're doing here?
Deborah Aqua?
I'm going to refer to the Works Manager.
Thank you.
I think Lee might have a bit more background on this one.
Yeah, so there is always going to be a level of risk to council, and stormwater design and engineering is
It's not an exact science.
No, it's not an exact science, and as was alluded to previously, it appears the frequency of higher intensity events appear to be increasing. The stormwater modelling accounts for particular rainfall events and of various intensities, frequencies and durations, and there's no guarantees that we won't get a 1 in 100 year event 2 days in a row. The council has undertaken sort of significant modelling of the catchment, and the conditions that are proposed recommend the methodology proposed by the developer be utilised, but that the report be amended to use the data that council has compiled in the report prepared by and engaged by council, so that we can have some greater surety that the system will be designed to accommodate any anticipated event. And yeah, I guess all we can do is design it to in accordance with best practice, as we have recommended in the report. But obviously we share concerns that there is potential for an increase in flood risk, and hence the requirement for the flood risk assessment to be undertaken prior to us approving engineering plans, and certainly prior to us releasing any final plan of survey for any of the lots within the subdivision.
Councillor Simon?
Thank you. Yep, that's well answered. Thank you. So I suppose my next question is, if this subdivision is approved and let's say, I know we're doing everything to mitigate any flooding, but let's say it did fail in the flooding and it did flood, will this cause any extra flooding to the people who've made representations against this subdivision? Will this increase their risk of flood at all if there's a failure within this subdivision?
So there is, if you ask the developers' engineers, they are satisfied that there will be no increase in risk to adjacent properties. The council, and particularly council's works manager Rob Brunning, we certainly have concerns, and hence the requirement for that additional report. And as alluded to previously, there is a reliance or that works, the downstream works and the formalisation of the channel downstream and works that have been previously highlighted and recommended in the Holcombe Court stormwater assessment may need to be undertaken in order to mitigate any increased risk of flooding to downstream properties.
We know there's a considerable risk to downstream properties at the moment, and the flood mitigation recommendations in the report does recommend that you start downstream with works. You don't usually start at the top of the catchment to formalise it, because it will increase the speed of the flow down to those lower in the catchment. So that's what is a little bit unusual about this, is it's coming to you in this order, these works, to approve a subdivision upstream, which includes the requirement to upgrade the culvert on Alma Road, whereas where you would normally start with your flood mitigation works is at the downstream end. However, there are conditions put in the reports to try and push the developer, if we haven't already got round to those works downstream, that that they will have to carry them out.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Yes, thanks, Acting Mayor. Just one, hopefully a quick question. I noticed in condition 37 there, the Holcombe Court Stormwater Assessment, which was prepared, revision 3, prepared by Anna Wilson. Is that the report we're talking about, or is that, and how significant is that going to be in relation to this application and the works that our council might undertake in the near future?
So the report you're referring to is the final version of the report that was presented to council in, I believe, September last year, and includes various recommendations for works within the Holcombe Court catchment to mitigate flood risks. So the recommendations in this permit require the subdivision to be undertaken using the methodology proposed by the applicant or by the applicant's engineers in having and maintaining the open channel, but to prepare an amended stormwater management report essentially using the figures that were determined by the report that was engaged by council. So there were some, the developer's engineer used a different approach to calculating their stormwater volumes and what have you. So they used a methodology for that, which is now being superseded. Council used sort of a sophisticated stormwater modelling process, and we're requiring that the developers report be amended to utilise the data consistent with Council's report.
Thanks, Lee. That's a really good response, because there was a point in their application I noted where the stormwater retention in the creek, we call it, I guess, that flows through there would be okay for 10 minutes, but you know, if it went any longer, it would be a big problem. So I guess what you're saying there is your calculations and your workings out through Rob and yourself are now asking them effectively to produce something a little bit better.
Ms. Bevilacqua?
I'm going to, Mayor, I'm going to pass over to Lee again, just for the final comment.
Yes, so in essence, we are looking at ensuring the developers' reports are consistent with Council's. And one of the things that we obviously want to determine is that the detention proposed is adequate, and hence the reason why we still want to retain the ability to include the Part 5 agreement for the rainwater tanks, should additional detention be required.
Thank you.
Councillor Robinson, just with regard to Councillor Briony's comment earlier about the condition regarding climate change, I believe that one of the differences between the report that was commissioned last year and the report the developers used was that the first included taking into account climate change scenarios.
A 30% increase was allowed for climate change.
Thank you. Councillor Simons?
Probably just a comment from me here more than anything, I suppose, just thinking out loud. I want to be very sure that the people that have had all the problems with this stormwater overflow are not impacted in any way by this subdivision, by us approving it. That is really the surety I'm looking for here, and I'm happy to take it from our engineers and our planners if they're comfortable in giving that.
Thank you, Councillor Simons. Robin? Councillor Ms. Bevilacqua.
Yes, Mayor, it was our works manager who'd like to say something.
I suppose on that note, I'd just like to reiterate what I initially alluded to regarding the risk. And to control the stormwater downstream, Council does need to enter 4 properties to formalise the channel. This is in addition to the new culverts under Holcombe Court, and this is where the risk lies to Council in how difficult this process could be, not necessarily will be. It could be. The channel to go through these properties hasn't been designed, and we certainly haven't got any approval from these landowners to build this channel. So, yeah, this is where the risk lies with Council, is creating an urban area, and hence, once we're creating an urban area under the Urban Drainage Act, we need to control the stormwater. And yeah, this is where the additional cost is to Council in controlling it, because now we have, I believe, in approving this subdivision, we have an obligation to control the stormwater downstream, far more than what we already have done in the past.
Councillor Arnold?
Yeah, I fully appreciate that I have spoken before on this matter, Mayor, but there's just a couple of things I'd like clarified. And I'm need to be assured, like Councillor Simons, that there will be no approvals done for this subdivision until the stormwater impact on not only that subdivision but on other properties is mitigated or is at least dealt with, for want of a better term. And can I just say, in terms of this, I'd like to say thank you to the Acting General Manager for having our specialist staff, all our specialist staff, involved in this discussion, because it has certainly been beneficial in terms of making a decision around this. So but if I could just get that clarification, and the first question is, there will be no approvals, for the sale of the subdivision or whatever, until all this stormwater work has been done.
Mr. Brunning or Mr. Whiten, who's going to answer that question?
I will attempt to. So I guess we share similar concerns, and in an attempt to provide some certainty, we have particularly conditions 34 and 35 requiring the flood hazard report to be undertaken. And essentially that flood hazard report requires them to identify if there's an intolerable risk to the subdivision from flooding, and also whether there'll be any increase in risk to adjacent properties. And then that any recommendations or measures identified in that report must be implemented prior to sealing the plan of survey for any stage of the subdivision. So that is probably the key conditions that are proposed to address the risk and concerns of ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. Whiten.
I'll let Councillor Browning and then myself. I'd like to say something as well, if I may, but Councillor Browning.
Through you, Acting Mayor, mine's just a comment really. After reading the stormwater assessment of Holcombe Court, I mean, it's a really volatile area for water, isn't it? For stormwater and for saltwater coastal inundation. So, for me, I think it, to be turning it into an urban sort of landscape is fraught with difficulties. So, yeah, I mean, the report was really, the report I found really interesting reading, which, as a council, we will need to deal with what's happening on that foreshore bit, somewhere in time to come, whether it be shorter rather than longer. So, I mean, that could change everything. So it's very volatile little spot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Browning. Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Simons.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Yeah, firstly, I'd just like to concur with Councillor Arnold and Councillor Simons' concerns about additional inundation that hopefully this won't, if we've approved this, won't affect the adjacent residents. But it was very pleasing to actually hear that our council staff that are here today are actually just as concerned by the sound as what some of us are about the possibility of inundation, and are actively working to try and prevent that as much as possible. So that was very pleasing. So it's really just a comment, Acting Mayor. I am concerned about the extra inundation that may or may not occur, and I think that it's pleasing to hear that that's foremost in our engineers and works managers in their eyes. So thank you.
Councillor Simons.
Yeah, look, just I agree. It's great to hear our officers well aware of it. Just one thing that might help councillors, that helps me a little bit about all this, is that the stormwater, and I stand to be corrected by our officers if they don't agree with this, but the stormwater in the area still falls on the ground. I suppose you do, by putting a roof and catching it on a roof, you do have some chance of doing something a little bit different with it. And that does give you the opportunity to perhaps mitigate some of that water that is coming downstream. So you do have that opportunity with the subdivision there, I suppose. There's no more water coming out of the sky, it's just landing and getting caught in a different manner.
Thank you, Councillor Simons. I have really grave concerns over this one, in the sense that we're talking about downstream. My thoughts are heading up the hill. Across the road from this subdivision, there is a culvert, and the water comes gushing when it rains, and we have these events, and we're having them more often than not of late. But when the water comes down off that hill into that catchment area before it goes over the road into this particular proposed subdivision, it is like a torrent that comes off the hill, and it doesn't quite make it under the road. There's you know, the debris that gets caught up in the fence, which is then causing the flooding across the road, and there's all sorts of issues before it even gets to, in my opinion, gets to this particular proposed area. What my question is, through myself actually, to the, sorry about that, but to the our qualified staff here today, what is council doing upstream off that hill to mitigate the rain, the catchment that comes through over that road area?
If I may, and then I might hand over to Rob to make comment. One of the recommendations in the report is that the developer, unless their flood risk plan comes back and says that there is no risk to the subdivision from flooding, the developer will have to upgrade that culvert under Alma Road and any associated realignment of the channel upstream. The big question there is whether it creates a risk to the subdivision. I guess when looking at it, is it fair and reasonable to require a developer to fix an existing problem if it doesn't impact their subdivision, and if their subdivision doesn't create any additional risk? Insofar as what happens downstream, then that's a different story. I think we're quite clear in the recommended conditions that unless their report says there is a tolerable risk and essentially to their subdivision, then they will have to upgrade that culvert, and it's a recommended condition. But yeah, Mr. Brunning may want to elaborate on that from a council works point of view.
Yeah, I can probably only add a little bit to it. We have, since the recent rains, well, probably about 2 weeks ago, done a little bit of work on that culvert. It was in bad shape. We've done a little bit of concreting work and also cleaned out some of the channel upstream. And yes, by approving this development, there will need to be more control over and cleaning out of that culvert. There is bushland above it, and yeah, it will over time build up again. So we are increasing the works required to be done. But yeah, we're servicing 11 new lots, so it's expected that we do some works. I know some of the people downstream are concerned about development further up on the hill and some clearing that's been occurring. But yeah, it's private land, and yeah, we don't have a lot of control over that area. While the subdivision might not increase the risk to the properties below from flooding, we already know there's great risk of them flooding. It's happened several times in the last few years. Really, what we're doing by approving this subdivision is we're requiring council to fix those things downstream, because it was a rural area before. What we didn't have many obligations, we didn't have a legislative requirement in a rural area to maintain a natural creek. But now we have by developing these 11 lots, we will have a clearly defined channel, and it will become an urban area, and hence there will be more maintenance required downstream where the channel is in private property. So yeah, once again, I'm just reiterating my concerns about having to enter private property to do works. We don't have any easements through those areas.
Thank you. The other concern that I have is that I've brought this up before with regards to, and I know I supported the previous development, is that we are approving these developments, and our water infrastructure, which is really nothing, not so much to do with us, but it's our water infrastructure has not been upgraded for many, many years. So the pressure put on our water, this is the other side of getting water, but water to the house. The pressure that we're putting on our existing infrastructure within Taswater, and i.e. the Prosser Dam, is that ever taken into consideration? And I do believe that there is some talk that the dam is being upgraded, but when and by how much? And I have concerns that, you know, the more people we get here, the less water we're going to have. So is that a question that can be answered by Mr. Whiten?
Sorry, unfortunately, no. So it's a requirement of council that we refer the application to Taswater, and Taswater provide recommendations for refusal or conditions of approval. So we are reliant on entirely on their response.
Thank you. So, councillors, there's been considerable debate and conversation with regards to this application, which I have found exceptionally good. In saying that, I'm going to ask if the mover, which was Councillor Breeny, would he like to close debate?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Like yourself and others, I am just as concerned as everybody here, not just some of us, but as Councillor Robinson mentioned, some of us are concerned about drainage. I'm sure every one of us is. This area is, you know, historically, even us new councillors this term know exactly what the issues are there. We've been confronted with it 3 times now. I believe that, thank you to the advice that we've been given. It's been excellent. It's helped me immensely. And also, I'd like to just make sure that in the motion that I have put and that we will be deciding on, just to ensure that condition 12D be amended in accordance with the statements made by our consultant engineer, Mr. Whiten, rather than the D that's shown in this agenda. I
Councillor
assume everybody heard it.
Councillor Brenny,
Thank you.
if it would be helpful to everybody, I'll ask Ms Higgins to read them out again. Is Council happy with that?
Just condition 12C would be the one I think that we need. Thank you.
Yes.
I think it's 12D.
12D.
Rainey.
Okay, we've got 12D, where on-site detention is provided or required on individual lots. Point 1, the owners of lots 1 through 11 arising from the subdivision permit, excluding lot 100, must install and maintain rainwater detention tanks with diversion devices to collect all stormwater runoff from roofed areas of a size and type to be determined and shown in the engineering design drawings. Point 2, the design details for point 1 above are included in the agreement in a clear, readily understandable manner.
Thank you.
The seconder is okay with that amendment. That was Councillor Churchill. Yep. So, councillors, that being the debate is now closed, so I will now put the motion. All those in favour? So that is Councillor Arnold, Councillor Breeny, Councillor Simons, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Browning. Those against is myself, Councillor Woods and Councillor Churchill. Councillors, the motion has passed. 5-2. We move now on to 4.4, Development Application 2020/333, Crown Land, Swansea, corner of Noyes Street and Franklin Street, Tasman Highway. Councillor Breeny, we're going, is it Councillor Breeny? No, not now. No, my apologies, it wasn't you. So the motion, or the recommendation, I should say, is on page 74. Can I have a mover, please? A motion, sorry. Councillor Breeny? You're on mute, Councillor Breeny.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that, just a correction, I'm looking for why there's an A. I move that pursuant to section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, Development Application 2020/33 to erect an electric vehicle charging station at Noyes Street, Swansea, be approved with conditions 1 to 5 and advice A to F.
Thank you, Councillor Breeny. Can I have a seconder to that motion, please? Councillor Simons? Councillor Breeny, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. This has been a proposal that's been put forward to Council for, I think, over 12 months ago. There are concerns that were raised by the by a representative in relation to the location of the parking bays in Noyes Street, compromising the development ability of a lot on the corner of Noyes and Franklin Street. I'm satisfied that the response from the planner has addressed the issues in relation to future development, and hopefully at any time that future development does take place on that corner lot, that the location of these charging bays, parking bays in Noyes Street, would be readdressed as part of the assessment of that development, rather than stopping this development based on a proposed development that hasn't happened, and we don't know whenever it will. That lot on the corner has been vacant for all time. Until such time as it is developed, I think we're being premature in compromising the development of a charging station adjacent to that, not on it, it's just next door on Crown land. And I understand that it's possible that this will be utilised very much to the benefit of the tourism industry along the East Coast. It's a fast charging station, not just any charging station. There is already one slow charging station, I think, at the caravan park, and maybe another one, I'm not sure. But this is a 25 to 30 minute charging station, which enables a lot of travellers now who have electric vehicles to utilise the tourism aspects of the East Coast. And I commend it to councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brini. Councillor Simons, as a seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Acting Mayor. I agree with Councillor Brini's sentiments there, and I certainly acknowledge the representative's concerns, but I think there comes a time when we've just got to start to do these sorts of things and make these things available for the well-being of our community, really. So I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Simons. Does anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against the motion? Any discussion? Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I'm not speaking for or against the motion. I just would like some clarification around page 68 under risk and implications. It says this is not anticipated to be largely beyond existing parking enforcement duties in the area, depending on the frequency of infringements. And on page 69, in the background, in relation to entering into a formal site agreement with EHT, it says council will support the operation of the site by providing enforcement of parking restrictions. Given that we are a council with no parking meter people, enforcement officers, I'd like to know how we're actually going to not be in breach of that particular condition.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Ms Bevilacqua?
Councillor Arnold, I have to admit, I don't know. I hadn't realised that that was in there.
That's fine, Ms Bevilacqua. I'm on your team straight away. I don't know either when we don't have parking enforcement officers. Thank you.
And I think it's not just parking enforcement officers. I think it's the law for them to enforce. But
if I may, Acting Mayor, I mean, we do have outside some of our service stores across our municipal area, for example, pharmacies, we have these signs that say, you know, half hour parking, quarter of an hour parking, whatever, to try and assist, you know, our less mobile people accessing those buildings. But we've not got any way of policing it, and that, I guess, is my point in relation to this electric vehicle. I don't have a problem with the electric vehicle charging station. I just have a concern around how we're actually going to enforce the parking infringements. So I don't know that I necessarily need an answer to that now, but it might be something council needs to look at in the short term.
Councillor Arnold, I just asked Rob Brunning, is that sentence there, the general maintenance of the site area, not the equipment, is acceptable for our works department. I think the other part about the enforcement of parking restrictions might have to be taken out.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. I think I think if it's something that we can't actually do, then it probably shouldn't be in there. Thank you.
Councillor Breeny?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm of two minds here. In relation to that, I would assume that the operation of providing enforcement for parking restrictions would be, in the case of statutory or state legislation, the power of the police. However, where council put up half-hour parking and quarter-hour parking signs that aren't part of a council-specific parking policy, then they are as relevant as the piece of tin that they're written on, if you understand what I mean. This probably would be the same issue. And considering that there won't be a capacity to implement the restrictions, I concur, I think, with Councillor Arnold that maybe it might be better to withdraw any requirement in conditions to enforce parking restrictions. However, we would want to be very careful that in withdrawing this requirement, that EHT Proprietary Limited doesn't find that a compromising situation that would restrict them using the site, because they would want to have control over the area from the point of view of they're the ones who are putting all the money to this, and they're providing the service. They'd want to have some sort of surety that people aren't just going to park there and not be able to use the site. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure whether or not we should take it out, but I'm open to suggestion.
Councillor Robinson?
Thanks, Acting Mayor. Maybe just a slight change to that last sentence there could be council will support parking restrictions for EV charging only and general maintenance of the site area. So it's showing, as Councillor Breeny is alluding to, that we actually supported the parking restrictions, but we're not actually saying we're enforcing it.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Sorry, Councillor so Miss Bevilacqua, please. So I've got Miss Walters here. Would like to
make a comment. This isn't a particular condition. This is background information from a letter that we have already sent. We can't change what's happened in the past. This is part of a broader issue that council do need to address. Our parking restrictions, whilst they may act as a deterrent at the moment, based on the piece of metal that they're written on, as Councillor Breeny mentioned, our bylaw does not give us the power to enforce them, nor does it give the power to the police to enforce them. So we need to address the omission from the bylaw to address parking so that these can be enforced. We would then be able to give our officers the power to, on the spot, address them should it be required. I don't think we'd have the resources to necessarily have dedicated parking officers.
Thank you.
Can I please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Arnold. I'll defer to you.
If I may, Councillor Breeny, all I was going to say is that what Mr. Walters has just alluded to is exactly where I was coming from. You know, I mean, I don't have a problem with the situation right now because that is not actually a condition in the
That's right.
in your motion. But I'm saying maybe we do need to look at addressing the parking restrictions somewhere down the track. as Ms Walters has just alluded to. So yeah, I'm all good with that. Thank you.
Ms Bevilacqua, you wanted to say something?
Yes, Madam Acting Mayor. I was just going to say what Ms Walters has just said, in that there isn't an actual condition requiring that, and this is just background. Otherwise, we could also put in an item of advice at this point, something along the lines of, until a bylaw is enforced, council is unable to enforce parking. No, we don't like that idea.
Thank you.
No, I won't be willing to change my motion to that motion. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, is anyone wishing to speak against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Breeny, being that you have the mover of the motion is there, would you like to close debate?
Only to say that I look forward to the increased tourism numbers of electronic vehicles up the East Coast. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, councillors. So now I will put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. We're going now to 4.5. This item has been withdrawn with the written consent of the applicant. So we'll move on now to 4.6, which is on page 111. Mediated outcome for dwelling at 1533 Dolphin Sands Road, agreement by consent. There is a recommendation on page 112. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you. I'll move that in accordance with section 17(2)(a) of the Resource Management Planning and Appeals Act 1993, the Planning Authority agrees to enter a consent agreement with the appellant in Planning Appeal 40/20P for the reduction in height of the proposed dwelling of 500 millimetres from the original submitted plans and subject to conditions to be filed and considered by the tribunal.
Can I have a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Simons. Councillor Arnold, you're the mover of the motion. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, thank you. I don't think, Madam Mayor, we had sufficient background advice and qualified advice in relation to the matter. I think it speaks for itself.
Thank you. Councillor Simons.
No, I haven't anything to add.
Thank you. Any councillor wishing to speak for the motion? Again, for the motion, Councillor Breeny.
Thank you. I just wish to say that the legal advice that was given to us in relation to this makes it very clear that this is the perfect way to go to avoid any further action on council. Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Churchill.
I just wanted to add there that it wasn't just, I think, just a good legal outcome. I think that 500 millimetres at that site, and I know that site just a little bit, I think it will actually make a visual difference. And I think it's been a really good outcome from a practical point of view as well as every other aspect. So yes, thanks to our planning department for handling it so well. Thank you.
So any more debate on the motion? Councillor Arnold, as you're the mover, would you like to close debate?
No, thank you. Mayor, I'd just like to support the comments made by the councillors in relation to the outcome. Thank you.
That being said, councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. Under Regulation 25 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures, Regulation 2015, the chairperson hereby declares, or I do, that the council is no longer acting as a planning authority under the provisions of Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 for Section 3 of the agenda. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold.
I'll move that council no longer acts as a planning authority at 3:50 p.m.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Breeny? All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Oh, the one I was going to say. So we move now on to page 114, the financial reports. They start on 115 and go through to 120. There is a motion on 114. Can I have a mover, please? Or recommendation? Councillor Churchill.
I move that council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ended 31st of July 2020.
The seconder for the motion, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Churchill, as a mover, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I have no problems with any of the reports. There was nothing outstanding to my eye. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
No, I'm happy with what's been presented.
Any councillor wish to speak for the motion or ask questions what's contained in these reports? That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So we move now to page 121, section 24, committees, a statement of expectations report to council, August 2020. There is a recommendation at the bottom of page 121. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. That council adopts the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council of Expectations implementation policy as drafted and attached. 2, commitment by the General Manager, A, that a General Manager be asked to sign a statement committing to the standards of behaviour in the statements of expectations at the first ordinary council meeting following appointment, and B.
Point of order, Madam Acting Mayor. If I may point out to Councillor Robertson, there is a note above it that the following recommendations should be debated separately.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go.
Thank you, Arnold.
So Councillor Robinson has moved that council adopts the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council Statement of Expectations implementation policy as drafted and attached. Can I have a seconder to that motion, please? Councillor Churchill. So Councillor Robinson being the mover, do you have anything to add?
Only that it sounds like we need to debate it. Acting Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Churchill?
No comment at this point. Thank you.
So does anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against the motion? That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Oh, you mean the waiting
So, councillors, just for your information, our other guests, Mr. Brunnings, they clicked the wrong button and exited the meeting, so they're going to come in and join us personally in the chambers here. Okay. Right. So, can I have a motion, please, on point 2? Anybody? Councillor Robinson?
That commitment by the General Manager, A, that a new General Manager be asked to sign a statement committing to the standards of behaviour in the statement of expectations at the first ordinary council meeting following appointment, and B, that such a commitment remain in place until the retirement or resignation of the General Manager.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Arnold. Councillor Robinson, being the mover of the motion, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold? No? Would anyone like to speak for the motion? Against? That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Can I have a motion, please, for point 3? Councillor Arnold?
Thank you. I'll move that in relation to commitment by councillors, that all councillors be asked to sign a statement committing to the standards of behaviour in the statement of expectations at the first council meeting following election, and B, that such a commitment remain in place for the term of that council, and C, or that C, that such a commitment remain in place until the councillor formally requests that their name be removed from the statement of expectations, or the signature be removed from the statement of expectations. I'm just not sure that the word "it" is appropriate, Acting Mayor. I think it should say requests that the signature be removed from the statement of expectations. Is that?
Yep, that's been captured. Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Can I have a seconder to the motion, please? Councillor Breeny. Councillor Arnold, being that you are the mover of the motion, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, not particularly, Acting Mayor, other than to say that I know the Statement of Expectations Committee has done an enormous amount of work around the requirements that we're dealing with here today. And I have sat in on a number of those meetings, and I'm grateful to that committee for the work that they've done. So I'm happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Breeny. Do you have any comment to make? No, that's a no, thank you. So, sorry. Anyone wishing to speak for the motion? Against? Councillor Arnold, being that you are the mover, do you need to close debate?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That's a unanimous. So point 4, can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold?
Thank you. I'll move that the current statement of expectations be termed the 2020 Glamorgan Spring Bay Statement of Expectations, and that each be termed in accordance with the year of the election of that council.
Can I have a second to that motion, please? Councillor Robinson? Councillor Arnold, being that you are the mover, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, not particularly. Again, Madam Acting Mayor, I think it goes without saying that we need to identify each statement of expectations as they sit and apply to a particular council.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
No, thanks, Acting Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against? That being said, Councillor Arnold, being the mover, would you like to close debate? Not that there's been any. Okay, thank you. So that I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Oh, we've got right. Just have to wait a minute. No, it's not good because they're frozen. You're so we're all good. Yep. Thank you. Unanimous. So point 5, I need a motion, please. Councillor Robinson.
That Council adopts the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council Statement of Expectations Committee, revised terms of reference as drafted and attached.
Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Churchill. Councillor Robinson, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, only that the attachment's obviously in the great big tome we were given to read, and I imagine everyone's had a look at that.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Churchill, do you wish to speak?
No comments there. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Breeny.
Thank you, Acting Madam Mayor. By the way, it's page 501 on the 500 in the tome. On page 501 under meetings, the committee will meet at least monthly. The committee will meet on these approximate dates. We are already in August, and I wonder whether or not we need to just correct that situation since we're only adopting them now. I assume it's not 2021 we're talking about.
At least monthly. Yeah.
If I may, Acting Mayor, I think, yeah, that's been left in. They were the meetings we actually had to discuss this policy we're adopting. So I don't think those dates refer to future meetings.
Amend that to take it out.
Amend it to take it out. Councillor Arnold? Oh, sorry, Councillor Breeny.
Just a comment, maybe it's a possibility that we just delete any reference to the committee will meet on these approximate dates, but include to allow the committee reports, the committee must meet at least monthly or something like that.
Yeah.
No. Councillor Breeny. Now, this will be an amendment, will it?
No,
No.
no, if the seconders supports it, it can just be an extension of the current motion. But I just need, like, it will be a follow-on sentence as drafted and attached with the removal of reference to specific dates, specific meeting dates.
Yep.
On page, what is that, of the terms of reference?
501.
Okay. Within the terms of reference.
Yep.
Version 3.
Yes.
Is the secondary?
Is the seconder, who was Councillor Churchill, are you okay with that amendment or that?
All good.
Yep. Okay. So, Councillor Arnold, you had your hand up. Would you like to speak for the motion or against, or comment?
Okay. The terms of reference for the Statement of Expectation Special Committee effectively is no longer, in my head at least, effectively no longer in existence after it provides its report on the effectiveness of the Statement of Expectation to Council at its September meeting, and with their recommendation that the report be endorsed and forwarded to the Director, because that's their function. That is the sole function, or the end of their function, if you like. So are we suggesting that the Statement of Expectation Special Committee will continue for monthly for forever, for the balance of the term of this council? And if that is what's being suggested, perhaps we need to give some consideration to whether this committee then becomes a governance committee that meets 3 times a year to report on the on the governance of council in accordance with the Statement of Expectations. Rather than committing the Statement of Expectations Committee, including our advisors, to a monthly meeting that may not have any relevance.
Interesting.
Sorry.
I'm not sure what other committee members would feel, but I would have thought this might be something that needs to be revised after the September report is done, and consideration given to the function going forward.
Ms. Walters, you were quite, if I may use the term, garbled in your response just then, so I'm not totally sure. And that, I guess that's my point, if I may, Acting Mayor, that's my point. Do we just deal with this terms of reference now to get the final report right through to September, so that this Statement of Expectations Committee finalises their function, if you like, in September, and then we review the functions of this committee following that final report. Does that, are we? Okay. Ms. Walters seems to agree with me. I think there would be value in having a governance committee, particularly given the advice that we've received from the Statement of Expectations Committee. So I think there's some real value in retaining as a governance committee. I think there's some real value retaining the Statement of Expectations Committee as a governance committee that meets, as I said, quarterly, or a little bit like the audit panel, if you like, where they meet quarterly and review how we're actually going with the Statement of Expectations. But I don't think that's something that actually needs to be put into this motion, this terms of reference or whatever now. I think it's a matter of allowing this Statement of Expectations to achieve their functions by the end of September or October or whatever our time frame is, and then we look at amending their terms of reference.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. In case you didn't quite hear me before, that's exactly what I was saying, is perhaps we just need to review that once the final report's done and assess that then, and we can make a decision on how we move forward.
Yeah, that would be a really good outcome in my view.
Yeah. So I can speak here. So councillors, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Churchill, anyone else wish to speak for the motion? Against? That being said, Councillor Robinson, being the mover, would you like to close debate?
Only a comment, Acting Mayor, that I think, yes, I agree with Ms Walters that, after our September meeting, being on the committee, we'll make some decision at that point in time. We've got a policy, a resolution policy that we're also accepting. So we've got a policy in place and we've got the Statement of Expectations in place also. So I reckon that decision can be made after that final meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. That being said, and I will put the motion. All those in favour of point 5? That is unanimous. Thank you. Councillor Browning, if I may say, you're awfully dark. There you go. That's better. You're very dark, and I can't quite see your hands if it's coming up. Thank you. All right, moving on to 6.2, establishment of Swansea Community Hub, Section 24, Committee of Council. The motion, there is a recommendation on page 123. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Arnold.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll move that Council resolves to endorse the establishment of a Swansea Community Hub Section 24 Special Committee in accordance with Section 24 of the Local Government Act and Glamorgan Springbank Council 2019 guidelines to Section 24 Special Committee of Council, including the development of the terms of reference to be endorsed by Council at a future Council meeting. And 2, appoints the following 7 community representatives as Council members on the Swansea Community Hub Section 24 Special Committee. Ms Heather Groombridge, Ms Tracy Keane, Ms Pia Bartlett, Mr Colin Stevenson, Mr Tony Rigby, Mr Steve Barrett and Mr Craig Vermay. And appoints Councillor Breeny and Councillor Churchill as Council representatives on the Swansea Community Hub Special 24 Section 24 Committee if they are agreeable.
If I may speak, it's not that I'm not agreeable, and I'm not usually disagreeable if I can help it. However, I'd like Councillor Browning to take that position. It was more about, we've all been contributing to this, and it was nice to have the gender balance there if that were possible and if other councillors were in agreement. So if we could change from change that to Councillor Browning, that would be very appropriate. I'm sure she will accept that.
Making an assumption that Councillor Browning would accept that nomination, I'm happy to change the motion to read Councillor Breeny and Councillor Browning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder to the motion, please? Councillor Robinson. Councillor Breeny, are you okay with that nomination?
Yes, and I thank Councillor Arnold for the nomination. Thank you.
There's 4. Oh, sorry, councillors. There's 4 of me here.
You can close yours off if you like. Or you can just, or you can leave the
a bit disconcerting, Madam Acting Mayor, when we can see 2 of you.
Yes, you had 2 votes for the last motion.
No, my apologies for disrupting the meeting in this way. Now, Councillor Arnold, being that you are the mover of the motion, or you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to say that I think Council has been very fortunate to attract expressions of interest from such a diverse and talented group of people to form this Section 24 committee. And I thank those committee members for those future committee members for their interest in the Swansea Community Hub. And as a council, I'm sure we all look forward to working with them.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Acting Mayor.
Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Breeny?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'd like to reiterate the committee appointees, the volunteers, community representatives. They've done a sterling job in volunteering in the past, getting this hub to the state that it's in at the moment, and I commend them for it. And the fact that they're willing to stay on and help with the formal organisation of the area as a part of the Section 24 committee is commendable. And remembering always, as advised in the information, that we're moving to make this a community-run organisation, and they're the sort of people that we'd like to see at the forefront of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Breeny, anyone wish to speak against? Anyone for the motion? Councillor Churchill, did you had your hand up? Did you want to say anything?
That's okay. Councillor Breeny covered everything I wanted to say and my sentiments exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold, being that you are I noted that in number 2, in the motion, you said representatives of council. I think you meant representatives as committee members, because you said council members.
I'm sorry, on what part, Councillor.
On point 2, appointments of the following 7 community representatives as council members. You stated council members.
Oh,
It
did
should
I? My
be-
apologies. Should be committee members.
Thank you. Just making sure. Okay, so Councillor Arnold, would you like to close debate?
No, everything's been said that needs to be.
Much. That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. Moving on to item 7 on page 124, revised procedure, public question time. How do I ask a question? There is a motion at the bottom of, recommendation, sorry, at the bottom of page 124. Can I have a motion, please? I'm going to read this motion. Can I have a Annie? Sorry, Councillor Browning. You're on mute, Councillor Browning.
I move that council endorse the revised public question time. How do I ask a question? Procedures as attached to this report effective the 25th of August 2020.
Can I have a second to that motion, please? Councillor Churchill. Councillor Browning, as the move of the motion, would you like to speak to your motion?
Through the Mayor, I just like to, it speaks for itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Churchill, would you like to say anything?
No, I don't need to. Thank you, Mayor.
Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against? Councillor Browning, being that you moved the motion, would you like to close debate? No. That being said, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Councillor Simons.
Councillor, is it Councillor Simon? You've thought you were frozen. Sorry. So that's unanimous. Thank you. I'll be glad when we get back to face to face. Okay, so now we move to 7.2, appointment of emergency management coordinator, and there is a recommendation on page 28. 128. Can I please have a motion? Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Acting Mayor. That Council nominate Ms Beverly Allen as the Municipal Emergency Management Coordinator, with her name to be forwarded to the Minister for Police and Emergency Management via the State Emergency Management Controller as per section 23(1) of the Emergency Management Act 2006, and 2, recommends the appointment to be for a period of 3 years as per section 23(4) of the Emergency Management Act 2006.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Breening. Councillor Robinson, as the mover, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I think it's a really worthwhile thing we're doing there, and I think it all speaks for itself.
Thank you. Councillor Breening, would you like to say anything to the motion?
If I could get my mouse to work, I'd be dangerous. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, Ms Allen has been very helpful as far as I'm aware in relation to COVID-19 control, and I'm sure that she will undertake these duties with the same amount of professionalism. Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against? That being said, Councillor Robinson being the mover, would you like to close debate?
No, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So was Ms Kelly coming into this one or not?
I don't know that we do. We'll see how we go. It was fairly straightforward in the workshop.
So 7.3, councillors, Tasmanian Weed Action Fund project for drought affected farmers. There is a recommendation on page 130. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you. I'll move that council endorse the attached grant guidelines and eligibility document and grant application form and the technical committee together with the NRM team to commence rollout of the project in September 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Anyone wish, the seconder is Councillor Breeny. Councillor Arnold, as the mover of the motion, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Council will recall that we had a briefing on this subject, so I think we have sufficient information to support the motion. I appreciate that support.
Thank you. Councillor Breeny, would you like to speak to the motion? Or...
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. The report speaks for itself.
Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against the motion? That being said, Councillor Arnold, being the mover of the motion, would you like to close debate? No. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. We need to pop Mr. Breeny into the waiting room. So 7.4, Swansea Courthouse Management Committee. There is a recommendation on page 132. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Simons?
I'll move that the council approves a grant of $1,000 to the Swansea Courthouse Management Committee Incorporated towards the cost of sanding and sealing the room in the courthouse, which was formerly used as council offices.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Browning. Councillor Simons is the mover of the motion. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Browning?
Yeah, thank you, Acting Mayor. Yeah, I'd just like to, the committee's doing a really good job, so at the courthouse, so all we can do to support them, I think, is a good thing, and we're not providing all the funds, just $1,000, so I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Browning. Anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against? That being said, Councillor Simons, being the mover of the motion, would you like to close debate?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. It's fine.
I'll put the motion then, councillors. All those in favour? That's unanimous. We'll let Councillor Breeny back in. Councillor Simon?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, your audio is just playing up a little. I don't know if anyone else is having the same problem.
Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing Mayor as well.
Okay. Do you need me to speak more clearly?
No, it's not that. You're going in and out.
Oh, okay.
We seem to be having a little Wi-Fi issue, which is the problem with the acting mayor's laptop earlier. So let's see how we go. We're nearly there, or do we want to have a quick break? But we're nearly there.
We're nearly there.
Keep going.
Yep.
Okay, so we come now to, and I've lost
Really when you turn.
Councillors, we come to the late agenda item 7.5, Capital Works budget allocation. There is a motion, recommendation, sorry, on page 3 of that document. Can I have a motion, please?
Could I call a point of order here, please,
Sure.
Acting Mayor? I think it behoves Council to advise Councillor Breeny the outcome of the previous.
Oh, my apologies, Councillor Breeny. Yes, you are correct, Councillor Arnold, and thanks for bringing that to my attention. Councillor Breeny, the motion was supported unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now go on to 7.5. And the motion on the recommendation on page 3. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Browning.
I move that by absolute majority, Council adopts the revised capital works budget for 2020-2021 as attached to this item.
Thank you. A seconder to that motion? Councillor Robinson. Councillor Browning, that being that you're the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Through the acting mayor, it's all, we had a briefing about it, and all the information's there for everyone to see. So I don't think I've got anything more to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson? No. Does anyone wish to speak for the motion? Against the motion? Any comment? That being said, Councillor Browning, being that you are the mover of the motion, do you wish to close debate? No. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. So we move now to item 8, notice of motion, which there were nil. And then we have item 9 is petitions, and there were nil. Questions, number 10, sorry, questions without notice. There was a question from Councillor Browning, which has been responded to from the Acting General Manager, Mrs. Walters. Are there any other questions without notice? No. Okay, so we'll move on to item 11. There's a motion, a recommendation there. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Arnold.
I'll move that council moves into the closed session at 4:27 p.m.
Can I have a seconder to that motion, please? Councillor Churchill. All those in favour? Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We are in confidential. We will stop recording now.